Now we get a chance to go ahead and I know there's people throughout life that have always wanted to write a book, and then there's always the reason for writing a book. What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to do? This man right here, Kevin Meehan, wrote the book called Fallen Peppercorns: Overcoming Child Abandonment, Abuse, Starvation, Drug Addiction to Become a Humble Optimist. Now, this is a man who not only works on healing people, caring for people, and is so busy that when you described your significant other, you said it was your girlfriend. Mm-hmm. You don't even have time to get married, do you?
No.
That's what it boils down to, huh?
Exactly.
But again, tell me about this book, because it's fascinating from the standpoint of the proof of someone can evolve from a supposedly miserable situation, hopeless situation, a situation that has just got failure written all over it. But you became that humble optimist, and you perceived, and you conquered, and look where you are now.
I'm very fortunate. And the way I look at it, Benny, is that I'm humbled, and I appreciate what happened to me as a child. And the reason why is to appreciate everything I have. Even sitting with you right now and talking with you and having the honor to do so. Being able to feel that comes from the roots of what happened to me as a child. And it's instilled within this book. And it's meant to exhibit that if we really want to, we can overcome so many different obstacles we define as obstacles. Now for me, I actually consider this a blessing, what happened to me in my life, because it allows me to appreciate the time that I'm having with you, or the time that I'm having talking to people, and the opportunity of being able to share and to be able to help others, not only through medicine or science, but also psychologically, of saying, listen, to appreciate what we go through in hardships, which you've been through hardships, a lot of us have been through hardships, and to say, instead of looking at those as negative and inhibitory patterns, let's look at those as blessings for us, and let's use those as stepping stones to get to a point of where we want to be, to achieve what we want to achieve. I've had many people, patients, and when I give lectures and things like that, that have said, well, I'm not able to do that because of what's happened to me in my past. And the emphasis of this book, Fallen Peppercorns, is to say, listen, instead of using that to inhibit you from progressing, let's utilize that as a strong point in how you're able to succeed with what you want to do and what you want to achieve.
But I mean, when you were growing up, I mean, here you had kind of an ideal situation with your brothers, and just how quickly you were uprooted from that. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, it's like, I think the biggest fear people have with their lives is the element of the unknown. Because you don't know what's going to happen to yourself. Mm-hmm. So even though you had the circumstances that were not ideal by any means, you had a vision of where you wanted to take yourself. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is that what propelled you? Is that what guided you? Is that what inspired you?
In part, Benny, another part of that is understanding that really, and it boils down to my interest in physics, which I know more about now, and I know very little, but now I know more than I did at that time, is that really we all are a unification of life, humans, that instead of embattling our process of keeping separate, we can come together. And coming together to help each other, to understand that we really are linked, not only from a process of thought, but a process of biological as well, if we look at lineage. So to answer your question, it's about how we can not overcome, but to accept where we are and to be proud of what we are. And I'll be completely transparent. I'm agnostic, and I've always been curious. I'm not judging it, but I've been curious that I believe, my ignorance in the Bible is profound, but I believe that we are born into sin, according to many religious philosophies. And I look at that and say, really, we're born imperfect, rather than to say, listen, we're born great. Let's look at ourselves and appreciate what we are, instead of feeling that we're born unnatural, or we're born imperfect. What is the definition of perfect? And that elaborates what I'm trying to suggest is, let's start out life with a foot of saying, I'm good the way I am. And I don't have to feel ashamed. I don't have to feel like I have to always consider external validation. And that's how I look at it in this book. And with my father, when you read that book, you could see he was abusive in many ways. I was always looking to obtain acceptance from my father, even up until he died, because 2 years before his death, my brothers and I think 3 of my brothers were there in the presence of him, and he said, you know something, you kids ruined my life. What he was saying to me verbally is, we ruined his life just by being born. I see the same parallel in many religions. We're always trying to validate ourselves to this external father, instead of saying, I'm okay the way I am. Why do we always take this time to say, I'm going to prove that I'm good by doing good things all the time, instead of saying, oh, I'm okay. To validate myself and to accept myself for who I am. And that's what the premise of the book is meant to communicate, is to say, you're beautiful the way you are. Now, let's help you if you have health conditions or whatever the case, let's help you bring that to fruition. Let's bring you to your full potential. And that's what the book is about, and that's what my life, when you ask me the question about how I came through that, it's about accepting myself for who I was. You know, I wasn't this, real academic individual. I wasn't a person who could perform certain musical feats or anything else, but I began to understand, to accept myself for who I was, and that's okay. And I feel that one of the main messages, Benny, that I want to communicate with this book is, you're okay with who you are, and to accept with who you are. And what happens if you're raped? As you know, I was raped multiple times. If you were an addict of my situation of heroin, any of these things are just a process. It's like a season of the year. We have 4 seasons. If we can experience all those seasons and move on to the next season. And that's what the book is primarily meant to communicate.
And see, the way I look at this book is, this is the highway to get you out of that.
Yeah.
And it's a highway that's been traveled, it's been proven, and it works. And I've always said that impossible is an opinion. It's not a fact. So you can change your life. And you can through, and again, sometimes it's a spiritual thing, or like you said about agnostic, although I've had my reservation about that too, because I always thought that, you know what? You know, when they printed all these scriptures and stuff like that, Kevin, they didn't have spell check back then. How do we know that if we sent the monks back to examine those scriptures, that they go back and realize that it was a typo? It should have been celebrate. Celebrate, not celibate.
You're right. Exactly. And you bring up a good point. And that's why I think it's important to embrace all of these philosophies and understand them, rather than be critical and judge them. And to your point about why a lot of allopathic practitioners immediately jump to the conclusion, to your point about the trainer in Detroit, is to come to a conclusion before you even understand what it is. And you hit a key point, in my opinion: fear. How much of this is relegated to fear? How much of this impinges us from being able to move forward because of fear? How many people jump to the gun with health and say, I'm going to take a medication because I'm in fear, because I'm told something without really thoroughly understanding? And how much of this is based in fear, the inability to move forward and to reach our full potential? You've reached your potential, and you have more, I'm sure of that. And many other people that are watching this podcast have so much ability, and that's my communication to them, is to say, listen, you have so much capacity to perform and do what you want to do and achieve these goals and not let the past hold you to these things. How many times do we hear people holding to their past? Well, I was molested when I was a kid, and therefore I'm uptight and I can't get married, or whatever the case. Or, you know what, I'm Irish. The Irish, the situation, the potato famine, what the British did to us, and we can't, and I'm going, that happened years ago. Why am I going to hold that down? The same can be held to your question about situations with health, about predispositions. That if your family has had cancer, it doesn't mean you have to be held to that. You don't have to be held to the process that your grandfather had leukemia. You have the opportunity to change that. And we look at those predispositions and we say, listen, you don't have to live through that. You don't have to continue to be worried about that bridge that's going to collapse 10 tons, 8 tons. And that's the meaning of what the book is.
Irish.
Yeah, that's it.
2 Irish guys walk out of a bar. No, really, it could happen. Okay, now, let me go back to, you mentioned fear. And what I've found phenomenal is cancer patients. They don't fear the pain. They don't fear the treatment or the inevitable. But what they do fear is to be left alone. Now, that to me was, again, that fear factor, right? And you would think that these people would, the pain and they go through excruciating, but yet that's a condition that mentally really, really besets these people.
And to that point, Benny, if we can extrapolate, is that fear or feeling left alone abandonment? Feeling the fear of abandonment, like they'll be left alone or they'll be alone itself. And you bring up a very good point. With cancer, it's really interesting. I had a professor, and he said a statement that's very controversial. I mention this to people, and it takes a little time to steep in the mind to think about what he was trying to convey. Cancer is the cure. People are the disease. And what he meant was we allow cancer to develop in our system if we don't tend to the hemostasis, if we don't tend to our own environment. Cancer, if you elaborate it, is actually a way for a cell to try to survive. You have apoptosis, excision, right? These processes that occur. And these cell repairs, the destiny, basically apoptosis is basically a death. Excision is DNA repair. And basically these processes in the cell basically allow it to do what it needs to do, so it creates mitosis, we have cell division and that type of thing. Cancer is literally trying to adapt to an environment that your body's not used to. And this is a situation to where it's almost, what the professor was trying to suggest is, understand the environment. If you understand the environment, the cancer can't survive. There's certain situations where cancer can't live. It will behave just like your cell, what we call a healthy cell, if the environment shifts, because no longer is it capable of doing so. It's not able to go through the process of mutation, which is the third process: excision, apoptosis, and mutation. What we can do is we can invite excision. So if the cell is damaged, the DNA repairs itself through various different mechanisms. And by doing so, that's the process of how your body gets stronger.
Fascinating. Now, as I read this book, one of the things that came to me was a philosophy that I've always shared, and that is that you learn more from failure than you do from success.
Exactly. And that redefines failure as not being failure. It defines that basically failure is not failure at all. It's the process and the motivation of success. So you bring up, that's a very good point. it isn't really failure when we look at it. We only judge it as failure. It's almost like my interest is physics, as I mentioned. In physics, in quantum physics, it's basically, in summary, the probability of a particle ending up from one point to another point. That's a summary. And even when that particle ends up at one point, that's not certainty. That's a collapse of probability. So there's still no certainty. And the reason I bring that up is its definition in failure as well. We only define failure because that's our definition. That's our process of understanding our concepts. When our concepts, in my opinion, it would be beneficial if we begin to look at other ways of conceiving these processes and looking at failure as not being failure at all, such as the book. The book is, I didn't fail, I succeeded. And the success is being able to talk to you and talk to the audience about the possibilities about being able to help. And what I mean by help is to reach their standard of what they feel is their sense of contentment. Because what might be contentment for me or you, might be different for someone else.
Now, I mean, again, I'm come from the sports world, and I've always told boxers a loss. And granted, you know, the television industry for boxing is the worst thing in the world because they think a guy loses the fight, oh my God, that's the end of his career. But if you really think about it, it's a learning process. And I always tell fighters, I said, listen, if you learn something from it, that's great because that's going to help your career. And what I always, tell the fighters to do is don't complain about the decision. Instead, go address the people who scored the fight. Ask those judges why they scored the fight the way they did. Because your perception of what was a winning strategy may not be what those judges from three different angles are seeing. And in essence, that's what you're saying also, is that perception we have of what the body should be or what we should be may not be, the thing that you should be.
Exactly. What is the definition? If you see a piece of artwork, you think that piece of artwork's beautiful. I might look at it and think it's different, but it doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's almost a definition of truth. The truth is never 50-50. The truth always fluctuates, just like what we refer to in Chinese philosophy as yin and yang, or bad or good, or hot or cold. The way I emphasize this, Benny, we have 5 basic emotions. Humans seem to always gravitate to feeling one, joy. The beauty of life is feeling all 5, anger, sorrow, grief, worry, and joy. But isn't it interesting that in modern society, we don't want to feel sadness, we don't want to feel grief, and therefore we're going to take an SSRI or an MAO. Depression, in my personal opinion, is almost the feeling like I don't want to feel those other feelings. I don't want to feel joy. I don't want to feel sorrow, sadness, grief. I always want to feel joy. We develop the SSRI. We develop MAOs, serotonin uptake inhibitors, because we always want to feel one thing and push away the other. My question to you is, does this inhibit growth? Does this inhibit our ability to feel life by not feeling the emotions that we're intended to feel? It's like the taste buds. Sour, salty, bitter, pungent, sweet. If we aren't able to taste and experience all 5 of those tastes, what is life? That's how I look at it.
Well, and to elaborate on that, I've always said that, you get the patriarch and the matriarch. Through tremendous sacrifices, they've established all these fortunes. But for some reason, the offsprings, not quite so, because they don't feel all those emotions you talked about. Because they've had this cake life of a thing. And I said, with these most of these people, the most notable accomplishment in their life is they won the swimming race up the fallopian tube and came to be. And that was their last notable accomplishment.
Sure, exactly. Exactly. So the question I have for people is, wouldn't it be great to unveil our shroud and to say, we want to feel these things. We want to feel what sickness is like so we know what feeling good is like. That's how I look at it.
And that's what this book's all about. Fallen Peppercorns.
Yeah.
The highway to changing your life, whatever the obstacle, whatever precipice you happen to be in, to scale the mountain and now enjoy the moment.
Yeah.
Kevin, congratulations.
Thank you so much, Benny.